Hi, my name's Ari Peralta, and I'm a leading sensory designer and neuroscientist. And I'm so excited to be here with a student's perspective to talk about the future of architecture and sensory design.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in to A Student's Perspective. I'm here with Ari Peralta. My name is Jen. Thank you for tuning in. So, Ari, if you wanted to take a moment and just describe yourself, introduce yourself.
So, yes, thank you so much for having me here. So, my name's Ari Peralta, and I run a firm called Arigami, and we're based in the UK in London, even though we work all around the world. And we're really a playground, a sensory playground designed to experiment and explore and push the boundaries of what's possible through sensory design.
That's an amazing path to go down. Before we do get into all of that, did you want to explain a little bit about your educational background, maybe where you grew up, whatever it may be, to kind of land you where you
Perfect.
are today?
So I come from a very multi-sensory culture. Obviously, everything in life is multi-sensory,
Yes.
including reality. I'm from the Dominican Republic, a very lively, vivid, colorful, and full of culture country in the middle of the Caribbean. We share an island with Haiti, and I was born and raised there. Then from there, I went into marketing and did several degrees in marketing all the way to getting an MBA. And then I went back to school for design and then back to school again at Harvard for neuroscience. So for me, it's always been about connecting the dots. And in the beginning, it was about understanding how business worked. From there, how marketing and selling products and services worked. And finally, how the brain works. How does the brain add all this up?
That's amazing. So, with all of that background knowledge and education, what kind of led you to the relationship between the brain and color and sensory experience, all of that? What kind of got you to that position just after
So,
everything?
as a continuous student, right? And I say that because I will always be a student in life. My goal is always just to connect and learn more. And something that I've noticed and that others have noticed as well before me is that the more you know, the less you know. And that's what's exciting. So for me, my journey really I never set out to go and change sensory design or become a sensory designer. That was never my original plan. As most people say, it's something that I fell into, and it was part of my journey. So for me, the journey where it started pivoting, when I had started establishing and sold some businesses and did well, I went back to school, got into design, and I wanted to create a multisensory brand. Now, what does that mean? I had to search for what that meant. There was no definition for that. And that's what really led me towards meeting scientists, becoming a scientist myself, activating research, and partnering with brands like Marriott International, like Nissan, who are very curious and are looking forward to what does the future hold for sensory design and what are ways that we can actually improve how people feel. Now, since then, COVID's happened,
Yes.
and other things have happened in my own personal life, including I was sick for a while, and all these things lead you to a realization of well-being and mental health are critical things for a designer's toolkit to keep in mind. Now, if we're talking about a toolkit, where are the tools?
Hmm.
So that's where I've landed this really interesting career, if you will, or it found me, which is let's help identify and create tools that designers, architects, and other stakeholders can use to improve the efficacy and accuracy of sensory design.
Okay, that's really interesting too, how you were able to find that destination. Did you do maybe mini projects to kind of open up this experience to origami? Was there any prior background to the company, or you just kind of dove in and it grew from there?
So we just dove in. And honestly, I wouldn't say just growth, we evolved. And that was, I think, the entrepreneurial advice that I can give anyone out there looking to really innovate and disrupt. Beyond all that commotion, you
Hmm.
really want to create value. And a lot of times we have the set value that we want to bring, but that doesn't mean the market understands that value, or that doesn't mean that the end consumer is going to understand that value. So for 2 years, we actually were inactive commercially, just learning, just interacting, just going to the conferences, just meeting with some of the top researchers in the world and going to them and understanding, hey, what is it that we can do to support you?
Hmm.
And on the brand side, what is it that you need for us
Yeah.
to look for that can support your needs? And we almost became like a sensory broker, if you will.
Yeah.
And at one point, maybe about like 2 years ago, we decided to create our own projects. So we decided, okay, beyond any projects that we get commissioned from incredible clients, what can we do out of all the great ideas that we're coming across? What kind of products can we develop? And that's when everything changed for us. That's when we kind of got in the driver's seat, if you will,
Yeah.
as that we can still drive. But we got in the driver's seat and said, you know what, we're going to own this. We're going to take our time researching, developing new solutions. It might be years at a time for each project. And since then, we build bespoke teams to take care of whatever kind of problem we're searching. So I'll give you an example. So, one of the projects that we're most proud of is called Breathe and Create. And this is born out of a collaboration with several other experts, including Spirus Respiratory Analytics, Tom Middleton, who's the number one sound producer for Calm, and Richie Bostock, who's the leading breath worker. So we combined these three technologies and these three assets that we had and created a new game that allows you to breathe and generate graphics. Right now, we're applying that for a pilot for healthcare, seeing how we can improve diagnostics for children and pediatrics, specifically on the respiratory side.
So, have you noticed anything interesting about maybe having respiratory diseases like asthma or anything in that case? Have you noticed a theme or something interesting that has come about from that research?
So right now we're on the first level of research, which is basically, can we prove that by adding the generative aspect to a
Hmm.
meditation, in particular through breath, does that enhance or improve the effect or increase the duration of the effect? So that's where we're concentrated right now. We're doing a very large study, the largest of its kind, thanks to a scholarship that we won, a grant that we won with the European Union Development Fund. So we're working with London South Bank University, and we are doing massive testing now to see and prove how generative and biofeedback really increases
Okay.
that threshold.
That's really fascinating. If you wanted to elaborate a little bit more about your research process, then, whether it be specifically about this project or even just in general, if you follow a certain step procedure or whatever that may be.
Great. So when we open the doors to our playground, as we call our company,
I love that.
it always follows the same framework. First
Yeah,
of all, it's our principles and our philosophy, which, as you can see, it's all about well-being and all about strengthening our mental health. Now, those are very large umbrella terms. They can really mean anything. So
right.
for us, it's really about how do we strengthen your emotional intelligence, which is kind of like a muscle, and how do we also alleviate some of the sensory overload that you experience from all the things that were kind of put in front of. So those are the two main focuses or the two main areas in which we start every project.
Mhm.
Once it clears through what is that conscious effort that we're trying to do, then we build a team. And these are bespoke teams of experts specific to the problem or situation or challenge that we're trying to help resolve. From there, we get into testing and playing mode. And really, this is where we take these ideas that we imagine and we just play. And I think that's something that's very important to share with you in your audience, with students, and even with people who are very well established in the business. Don't forget to play. That's the time where you process ideas, where you put together different things and you make mistakes. And so ultimately, I guess what the message is that that component of playing is extremely important. And it's something that we don't normally talk about in a scientific setting. And that's why we love bringing different disciplines together. And at that intersection, that's where you have this curiosity, that's where you have this exchange of ideas, but also the absorption of ideas. So for us, when we talk about playing, we're talking about making mistakes, we're talking about learning and growing. And honestly, creativity is all about seeing the same thing in different ways.
Hmm.
So for us, that's a critical part of our framework. Now, once we've played, we identify some kind of minimal behavioral change. So you may have heard of that term as minimal viable product. Well, we
Hmm.
look at minimal viable behavioral change. What is the minimal behavior that we need to or we're looking to influence and change? Finally, at that point, we do testing, which is typically done with a university partner, an accredited university partner in their departments, whichever departments are corresponding to our research. Finally, we bring in partners to help us scale, right? So these are partners who either can adapt that technology into their buildings or infrastructures, or who are interested in owning that technology.
I think that's really important that you have that like four component parts basically to each of your projects or whatever path you may be going down with it. That specific word of play, I find really fascinating because just to relate to being in design school, you're basically re-taught how to think about things and you're taught that mistakes happen and that criticism is not always a bad thing. It helps you learn. So that play portion, you are excited to be curious and find out new things. And yeah, maybe make a mistake, but you learn from that mistake. So I think that's really awesome that you put a positive play on that entire portion of research because then again that probably excites everyone doing it to just keep on trying. So I
It
really
does, but it doesn't excite brands, right? So,
okay,
and I'm just being honest, right? No brand's going to come up and say, "Hey, I'm excited to," in their minds, waste time and
right.
and waste money and figure it out. But the smart brands, they're the ones who invest time in this. Apple
Mm-hmm.
does this, Google does this, right? So the companies that we've learned to admire have taken research development into another area of their business, right? Into a future securing and a future proofing
Mm-hmm.
area of their business. And I think that's where we're at, right? We're futurists, but we're also practical. So we love technology, but we're all about nature and humanity. So we are a cluster of dichotomies that somehow came together and produced something that I think is quite innovative and different. Now, the example with Breathe and Create, that's just one. One of our other dear projects, which is now a company in its own, is My Cocoon, something that I'm very proud to be involved with. Here we combine chromotherapy or color therapy, or light therapy as it can be known,
Mm-hmm.
together with psychoacoustics, music, and with meditation. And we're basically creating the calm for creativity. And I can't wait for that because a lot of us have, especially those of us working in creative industries, um, we get blocks and those blocks can last a while. And we
Yeah.
know all the ideas are there, but somehow we need to hit refresh or reset in our brains. We're
Mm-hmm.
using color literally to influence your other senses and activate other parts of your brain.
That's amazing. I actually, so I'm interior architecture major, psychology minor, and something that has very much interested me from the start was color neurology and how it kind of affects you emotionally and just in a space, how it can affect you and your experience within that. So I feel like you have, I would definitely agree, this is a very innovative thing that you have going on here, and you're combining the best of both worlds. You have the facts, and then you also have the curiosity and the fun stuff combined into one. So this whole thing is really fascinating. And I'm curious as to if you have any, I don't know, maybe studies to see that it has been successful. Do you go back and kind of try and find a success rate, see what works, what didn't, or if maybe you're not at that stage yet?
No, of course. So it really depends on what part of the project. So using my cocoon and the color therapy as an example, first we had to establish, can color affect your mood? And
Mm-hmm.
science, and thanks to the research of many, many scientists for the last 2 decades, we were able to establish that yes. But the thing that was difficult to establish until now, as you know, is that we couldn't capture how it worked. We didn't
Right.
understand the psychological mechanisms that work together with the physiological mechanisms of how we
Hmm.
interpret light. And all these things have advanced at an exponential rate because of two things mainly. One, the advances in neuroscience, and two, the advances in neuroimaging. So, because we're now able to understand a bit better how the brain works, we still have no clue basically, but we get a bit of a better idea.
A little bit
It's
at a
complex.
time.
And really now with the neuroimaging, we can then capture it. So when we look at the science behind color and mood, for example, we're looking at four different areas. And that's how complicated the science gets. Color affects us on a social level. That's what we mostly talk about when we talk about trends and things like that and
Yeah.
symbolism. Okay, social. Color also affects us on a psychological level. Now, I'm not talking about what you think is color, but I'm talking about your own memory retrieval. So if I ask you right now, what do you think of when I say blue?
Calm, chill.
So that was a word association that you did all inside your mind where you retrieved what meaning that color had. And that's the
Hmm.
biggest point. Up to now, many of us have been incorrect at stating, hey, this color means this. It
Right.
doesn't, it's very personal. So the third part to the color science, if you will, is now we can actually, one researcher in Chicago was able to actually see the color interpretation of red in the brain.
Oh,
We never
wow.
knew there was, a synapse that we could capture and
Yeah.
we could actually observe and say, okay, that is red. So
Hmm.
there's a lot that we don't know. And as we move from psychological impact to physiological and even quantum at a subparticle level,
Oh, wow.
color is light. It's an aspect of light. So we're talking about two of the most complicated things we know, light and emotions.
Yep.
So we're combining these two. So to answer your question again, the research is ongoing. And I think what's great is that now with technology, especially in app form, we're able
Hmm.
to leverage and find data sets. So instead of us prescribing a color to you, we're literally understanding what is your relationship to color and then analyzing that data to create predictive color situations.
Wow. That's amazing that you've taken this personal approach to it because as far as I've read into it, it is very this color means this and this color affects you in this way. So it's really interesting to know that you can literally pinpoint per each person what each color can mean for them. Have you found a common ground between each color? Maybe how you mentioned red being one of the things you can personally relate to somebody. Have you done that with a lot of people and found red has a common theme, or is it all over the board?
So it's truly all over the board up to now. And
Okay.
that's where it gets really interesting because, as you can see, with anything that we do in this world, there's some kind of pattern. It's just
Hmm.
how granular can you get to identifying that pattern?
Yeah.
For us on the color side, we've done over 10,000 sessions, like physical sessions with the color, with brands like L'Oreal, brands like Bloomingdale's, huge brands. And in the clients, I mean, about 98% say they feel a difference. So
Mhm.
when we surveyed thousands of executives in these fields, 9 out of 10 believe that color affects their mood. Now, how? Again, these are the mechanisms that we're trying to really better understand and underpin, but we do know that they exist. Now, what are some of the similarities? There are cultural things that change these things. There's nature symbolism things as well. For example, if you live by the ocean, you're probably more likely to have connected that blue with something around the ocean. So it's just one of those things that there are some baseline biological triggers that we have by color that
Mhm.
aren't conscious. And those we don't understand. And these are kind of like embedded, if you will. Kind of like if you hear a siren, to kind of like step back a little
Yes.
bit and you didn't even think about it. Well, color
Mhm.
can do those things. We don't understand how. And evolutionary science is really what's going to answer that for us because we didn't have color all the time. We
Right.
developed color in terms of a code. And that's how I see color. Color is really a code for the brain to understand and to inform other sensory information. And scientists like our wonderful scientist, Professor Charles Spence at Oxford University, he's the leading multisensory scientist in the world. He's proven that color can change your perception of taste. So, for example, he did a great study at Oxford where they changed the color of fruit juices. And let's
Hmm.
say banana, they made it red. Suddenly, the people thought it was more berry than banana. There was no berry.
Oh, wow.
So, color can
That's
influence all of our senses. It can
yeah.
influence sound, it can influence temperature, which is also another sense,
Mhm.
etc. So, we know that it can influence our memory. It can influence our decision making and our cognition and our creativity. So again, it's about taking these elements that designers for a long time have only really had dictation, right? You've only been told yellow does this, orange does
Mhm.
this, and this changes everything. And that's what we're all about. We're about, again, opening your minds as architects and as designers and as the people shaping the future and giving you new tools to be more effective, to be more personalized, and as you said earlier, to be more fun, to enjoy it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that can definitely have a huge play in design and making spaces with that. Because then, say you have a client and you're doing just a residential project, you can easily tap into their mind and what they're thinking below the surface, whether they realize it or not, and be able to create a home and a space for them that makes them feel safe and calm and whatever maybe emotion they're trying to catch. But that is really amazing, just that personal level of this. I don't think I've ever even thought that far into color, but it's true. You're seeing it everywhere at any time of any day. So it is really important to dive into that aspect. Since you mentioned kind of how the senses can affect the others, just like exactly how you said, visually affecting taste. Is there any sense that or senses that you find are more affected in your studies, or maybe one is less affected and you try to induce it a little bit more, or are they all the same? You
So
kind of
here's
tap
the
into all.
interesting thing. It's complicated. And that's what
Mhm.
I love about it. That's not what people typically want to hear.
Yeah.
But we think of most things that happen in the human existence in a linear way because
Mhm.
that's just how we think. Unfortunately, that's not how things work. Things work in systems and things work at the same time. And with the senses in particular, there's a principle called the Gestalt principle. And it means that something adds far greater than the sum of its parts. That's the senses for you. Just because you include olfactory and taste and vision and sound doesn't mean you're just going to get that. You might get
Mhm.
more and you might get less. They influence one another, and we don't necessarily know that power of influence. But for example, with color, we know that the first thing that you do when you see something is the cones and rods in our eyes
Yeah.
determine what that color is and send it to the back of our brain, right? To our visual cortex to determine what shape it is, how far it is. This is just color,
Yep.
right? So it informs all these processes, and it's basically like the brain uses color as a shortcut to know all these other things, and then it sends the signals. This is before you and I can even think of something,
Mhm.
right? So it's beyond, it's faster than what our consciousness can process. So that's one thing. Now, each one of the senses have a different potential in terms of memory power. Let's look at it that way. So
Mhm.
with visual, we're talking about something called iconic memory. With sound, we're talking about echoic memory, right? And subsequently with the other senses. Each one of these have limitations. And the one that has the shortest threshold is visual. And that's why
Okay.
we say that our attention spans are low. It's because we can only remember about 2.5 to 1 second of what we actually see
Wow. Okay.
because we're seeing so much all the time. Our brain
Yeah.
just doesn't have the power to continue. Now, with echoic, which is sound, significantly higher. We're talking about 2 to 3 seconds of memory retention. And if we go all the way to olfactory, we're talking about 4 to 5 seconds. And that's why we say that smell is so important. It's
Mhm.
not that either one of these are important, but as you can see, they have weighted values. So if an experience, what you really remembered and what triggered your emotions was color, then guess what? That's what's going to really lead that experience in terms
Mhm.
of remembering that experience. But if what that experience, what really stood out to you was the smell, again, you'll still remember everything else, but it'll be kind of like unlocked through that smell.
Hmm.
Hopefully that makes some sense.
It definitely does because it has a few things coming to mind for me, whether it be you go to a concert and you remember all the flashing lights and what it smelled like being in the crowd and just hearing that music. I definitely can see that affecting you longer with your memory. But then I also think about how smell can sometimes bring about nostalgia. Maybe you smell something and it reminds you of your grandma back when you were 6. And I think that is really interesting because on a day-to-day basis you kind of can see yourself remembering things and it triggers your memory. So I really enjoy thinking about just how every single sense does affect the other, and it's a really interesting fact that it then helps you retain more of that memory. So thank you for sharing that little blurb there because that's fascinating in itself. So I do kind of want to ask you now about all those senses and how I have read a little bit about retail spaces. So if you wanted to go into that a little bit about whether you partnered with people, successful projects,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
So I've advised for some of the largest companies on earth, including Macy's, including Harrods, who we've worked with in the UK, and some major brands, including Gucci. Now, all these brands, regardless of the brands, um, they're all evolving their understanding and their use of this
Mhm.
sensory toolkit. For the most part, most designers, at least in the past, would approach sensory elements like sound, in particular, like music for a store, and lighting, like color. They would approach it almost like at the end, right? They would have their vision, they would create the vision, and then okay, what can we do to kind of just finish it? What we've
Mhm.
learned is that the most effective strategies start with sensory right from the get-go,
Yes.
because just like I mentioned earlier with the Gestalt principle, remember, if you align the senses, what does that mean, aligning the senses? It's something called congruence. Congruence means that they're complementary. And when you look at the wavelengths, let's say, of and frequencies between color and sound, it's the same thing at a different speed. So red has a corresponding sound. And this is where it gets really interesting. So this is the work that we do. We help fine tune the congruency between some of these elements to ensure that it's a pleasant experience versus a sensory overloaded experience. And I think that is the biggest key for retail, because I'm sure you've walked into a store or to some kind of building at one point and you can't really tell what it is, but you don't want to go in anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
It might be the light, it's just off, but you
Yeah.
don't know it. It might be the
Yep.
sound, it's just creating, it might be the smell, that one you can probably recognize. But
Yes.
we've all experienced that at some point where there's something that the store has done, typically unintentionally, that is deterring us from going in. So we help control that and we help reduce sensory overload by helping brands take more into account what they're not thinking of.
Yes. I think that's awesome because I actually do work in retail, which is kind of ironic that I'm able to relate a little bit to it. But the store I work at, which is just Old Navy, we actually do focus on the little details, I suppose. So when we're organizing a piles of shirts, we try to go in rainbow effect, or maybe the denim is light to dark. So I think it is really interesting because if you were to just throw them all out on the display, it can totally be overwhelming because you look at that and where do I start? I don't even know. So I think that is fascinating that you've taken not only just this personal level of experience and relationship between all of these aspects, but added it into a shopping experience. Because you're totally right. It can be very successful for businesses to adapt to the consumer because realistically, that's who they're hoping to gain. So I think that it's really nice that you gained that level of knowledge with that. What ended up getting you into retail? Just that process of connecting the two, or was, I'm sorry if you already mentioned that, but
No, no. So that's a great question. I do want to add a point there to retail that's super relevant and important. And I can use your where you work, Old Navy, as a great
mm-hmm.
example. You know, the stores of tomorrow aren't going to be stores that we go and pick up physical inventory products. The
Yes.
stores of tomorrow are all about experience and all about entering into the lifestyle, the personality of the brand, and becoming one with the brand. Um, in the future after that, it'll all be done in some kind of digital meta world that we're all learning
Yes.
about, right? But for right now, the evolution And it seems contrary to what most store brands believe.
Hmm.
Why would I invest so much money in property and physical space to just entertain people? But I think that's really what's happening now, where we're looking at every store moving a lot of their inventory and operations on a product end to online,
Yeah.
even though they have physical stores. And then in the physical store, that's where you can interact with the product. That's where you can interact with people such as yourselves who
Hmm.
represent the lifestyle of the brand. And I think those are going to be the things that are going to drive retail design moving forward. Now, you asked me, how did I get into retail design? Um, Crazy background. But when I went to Parsons, one of the three times that I went back to university in New York, I had an opportunity that opened up with Elaine Wentworth from Project Runway now, but she was
Oh,
back
wow.
then the editor in chief of Teen Vogue. We connected. She inspired me so much to think out of the box and to keep pursuing this dream of creating a multisensory brand. And I have to say, Elaine was one of the first people who kind of educated fashion would be a great way to introduce this concept. Unfortunately, fashion was not in the best position during those
Hmm.
years because of just a turbulent economy. But that's the whole point. We evolved. We took that passion that we had, we took those connections and network that we had, and we said, okay, let's process, let's think, let's imagine, let's play. And what we ended up with was a sensory research company.
Wow. I really love the path that you've gone through, and you have had some really magnificent partnerships, and that being one of your mentors. And honestly, every step of the way, you have these people that impact you in such a way that you don't experience them to. So it's really interesting that someone from Vogue, literally Vogue, helped you pursue your dreams. So I thank you for explaining that little portion of that. So retail wise, have you tackled the online portion of it? So have any stores come to you about maybe enforcing online, whether it's they're scrolling through just the website organization, because I think at that point it would kind of just be color that you're able to play into. Have you gone down that route yet, or it's like again in the future for you guys to
So,
tackle?
one of the areas that I'm mostly interested and curious about, and I say me as a company, right? We are very interested in the translation of
Okay.
physical senses into virtual and digital realms,
Wow.
right? So,
Okay.
for example, and I can't mention the brand here, but you can kind of add it up on your own. One of the biggest fast food providers who's really focusing on early morning coffee.
Yep.
They were exploring how do we give this emotion, this scent, this experience online. And believe it or
Hmm.
not, you can achieve that because again, it's all about creating those neural connections.
Yep.
So if we open the door, go back to that example I shared with you, where we open the door with one sense. In
Hmm.
this case, because it's digital, we can't open the door yet with scent. But what if we open the door with an image and a sound? That's going to connect you in your mind to
Okay.
that smell. So I'm going to use this experiment real quick over Skype right now on this call, and we'll do it for your audience. So if you guys are
Okay.
listening, try and follow this as well. Okay, so blank mind, let's start. I want you to think of lemon, of citrus, of mango. You just did it right there. You swallowed. You
Yeah.
literally could feel the acidity in your
Yes.
mouth when you did that. I didn't even show you a picture.
Right.
That's how it all works. So if we can guide the guest or the customer to have these experiences and connect it for them piece by piece, it happens already. So now if I showed you that image of the cheesecake and the brand,
Yep.
again, you're going to have much more of an experience. So yes, the all brands right now are starting at square one because nobody knows how to unlock all these other sensory experiences
Right.
online. I think there are many companies exploring it. A lot of VR companies are exploring, for example, scent release. I don't believe it's going to be done that way. I believe it's going to be done the way I just showed you, which is so much
Hmm.
simpler. It's all done in your head. A few years back, I spoke for Retail Week and did the first neuroscience master class for Retail Week, the magazine. And I remember back then, you know, we said, what's the future of the store? And I said, it's all in your head. And I think
That's
it
it, that's
stays, it's still proven today.
Yeah, definitely. And whether it be COVID or just the way that our society has been moving on to a more virtual world, it is a challenge that I think a lot of stores are facing. So the fact that they have this option to be able to successfully portray maybe their intent behind their company, whatever their branding may be, it's really awesome to be able to transition that into an online world because there is a huge disconnect being virtual, especially just going through classes like that or doing your business virtually. It has a huge strain on everything. So to be able to still convey that relationship between the consumer and the product, I think that's extremely important and should push businesses to be even more successful both physically and virtually. So it is really fascinating to hear about how that can work and portray within that. So I don't
Now,
know if
on
you
the
wanted,
back end of all of
yeah.
this, right? On the back end of
Mhm.
all the solutions that we create or that we own or that we license, there's a lot of data architecture. And that's what people mostly don't see. And our goal now with this data architecture is we're accumulating and gathering sensory data from all the different things that we do in hopes of being able to gather enough data to start making correlations. Our goal is to create sensory pharmaceuticals, right? And that's where my work with Nicole Bradford in Silicon Valley. She's from Epic Games. She is the founder of Transformative Tech over there in Silicon Valley. We came together and we said, you know what you're doing with the senses and what she was doing with AI, why don't we put it together and start building sensory profiles? And that's where we're moving towards next. So going back to your question of how can stores use this? Right now, they can use experiential sensory activations in store. But in the future, we hope to provide them with toolkits that allow you to better understand your customers on a sensory level.
Wow. I love that there's so many phases with each of these things. I mean, it makes sense because it's research and it's all science and facts along with that engagement of their personal experience. I really am interested in that research process and how each thing can then come into and evolve. Again, the evolvement of the company and all of that can just keep growing into something new and more exciting because at the end of the day, it's going to end up being this massively personal experience for whoever is going to go through that. So I really like that there's so many different perspectives from all of this. So thank you. I don't know if you wanted to add anything now, if there's maybe a project you'd like to touch upon that you've gone down with the sensory experience, or maybe just in general, something to add on to here.
Well, I work so much with students, and again, I'm a student too, so I
Mm-hmm.
work with my peers a lot. And for me, again, part of the rise in my career, I attribute it so much to the different individuals and organizations that either open doors or open my mind to being better. The best advice I can give to anyone in the design and architecture world right now, especially your peers, it's to always remain curious. And to remain curious, you have to go beyond what you know. So you have to always keep, and this, I just was with the top 100 architects in the world, right? In the world. And we were talking about this in a conference where I was presenting at, and they agreed. Why do you think they go to art galleries? Why do you think
Yeah.
they like watching anything and everything? Why do you think they travel so much? Again, it's because it's opening your mind to new ideas, to new ways of thinking. And the same can happen with science. So I just want to encourage you and your group to always continue learning. Never settle for what you know. Never, because there's always more. And the more that you connect, the better. I do this every night, and I not many people can actually keep up with this, but I recommend it. It'll be a lifetime practice. Every single night, I try and carve out between 30 minutes to an hour, and I watch or read uh, a documentary about something, anything, right? I think yesterday's was about butter. Yet somehow that connected something new in my brain that allowed me to
Yes.
do my work better today.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. Because that I think is really important to sit down and just gain as much knowledge as you can. Because whether if you stay in this narrow-minded perspective, you're not really ever going to learn something new. I mean, maybe simple things that kind of fall into your lap, but to be able to explore something different every single night, that's wonderful, because you could be on the job and then the next day realize, oh my goodness, butter is important right now, and like implement it into your design and research. So thank you for that piece of advice. Ironically, something we usually ask to end out this little show here is, if you were to be a student again, what would be one piece of advice you'd give yourself? And it's okay if you say that that would be it, or if you had a different kind of perspective to add on to that.
Honestly, I do have something I would tell myself, and it's something I told myself earlier today and every day.
Mm-hmm.
No is just no for now. Remember that.
Thank you. You have been wonderful to talk to. I am so excited to hear and learn about everything. If we had more time, I think I'd probably ask you a bunch more questions. But regardless, I really appreciate you taking the time to explain everything you have so far. Where can we find you on social media?
So our company is Arigami UK, and I'm also on Instagram, Mr. Underscore Arigami, and I think you'll probably provide all that on the details. But you can search for
Yeah.
us at arigami.co.uk, and you can learn all about us there. But again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm excited to implement this into some of my designs moving forward, and even the research paper I'm going to be beginning soon on color neurology. So this has been a magnificent conversation to be able to lead into that. Thank you everybody for tuning in to A Student's Perspective. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a like and a share. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.